Everyone loves to talk about buying real estate investments, but nobody likes to talk about managing them. So let's change that. Welcome to my 3-part series on how to effectively manage rental properties so that you are both profitable and you don't come off like a slumlord. I've divided this series into 3 different videos that will cover how to pre-screen your tenants properly so you get good tenants into your property, how to manage those tenants once they're actually in place in your property, and the third one, which is the worst, which is how to get rid of tenants once they become problematic, and some solutions to potentially avoid catastrophic losses in both your business and to somebody being evicted. So stick around for the ride, and if you haven't already, subscribe so that you can know when the next video in the series drops. So without further ado, let's get into today's video. So let's start with why pre-screening is so important. Your rental property isn't just a building, it's actually an investment. And a part of that investment is actually your tenants that are in place. This is because everyone knows a bad tenant can do a lot of damage to both your bottom line financially and your level of sleep quality. And so to avoid being in a financial disaster or having headaches and not being able to sleep properly, you need to properly pre-screen your tenants so you avoid problems further down the road. This is really being proactive with your rental property management. And this is why I actually think that pre-screening is actually the most important step in all of management. And so if you're gonna get anything right, get this right, learn how to pre-screen properly. And because pre-screening essentially works like a big filter, I've divided the filter up into 5 different stages of pre-screening so that you can sort of filter people through and you end up with one person who is sometimes I guess it could be more, but you end up with one person who is a viable tenant who's going to be good for your property, not cause you a lot of headaches, have good communication, and be able to actually afford the place, which is a big key that we'll touch on later. Now remember, when you're pre-screening, everything needs to coincide with fair housing laws. Make sure you know your local fair housing laws so that you don't overstep that, because you will get in trouble. Okay, so step number 1 is actually pre-screening your pre-screening. And so depending on where you've actually posted your listing, if it's Facebook or Kijiji or another website, you will probably get a lot of requests that say something along the lines of, is this still available and when can I book a viewing? Now, while it may seem like you have a lot of interest, a lot of times those people, if you do book something with them, aren't gonna show up to the showing, aren't gonna be responsive, and so you wanna filter out those sort of window shoppers that we call them, so that you can only be dealing with real people that are actually interested in renting the property. Now, what I like to do is I actually like to have a quick phone call chat with these people, because if they are not willing to pick up the phone or schedule a call, chances are they're probably not going to be a good tenant, because I don't want somebody in my house or my investment that's not going to pick up the phone when I call them because something is wrong. And so you can't just dial them right away when they ask, hey, is this available? And they instantly get a call from you, because that seems a little suspicious. And even a good tenant is probably gonna be a little wary and not pick up the phone. So I will usually say something along the lines of, yes, it still is available. Are you looking for yourself or for somebody else? That's really just an icebreaker to get them to warm up talking to you. They'll say something like, yeah, it's for me and my partner, me and my kids, whatever. A follow-up to that is, great. Just for security purposes, I need to verify that you're a human and you're local to the area. Do you have a time that we can have a quick 30-second call? I add 30 seconds because you want to emphasize that this is not going to be a long conversation. You're not asking them a bunch of questions, you're just verifying their identity. Most people will say, that's kind of weird, but okay. And so what happens is you call them, you ask them a couple questions, just want to double check your name, where you live, not their current address, but just what city, a couple things like that. It's really just a litmus test to see if they actually pick up the phone or if they're willing to have a conversation with you. Okay, and step number 2 is, once you've actually gotten through a lot of those window shoppers who were gonna ghost you or not show up to the showing, because you value your time and you wanna book a time with them to view the property, I like to give them options. Don't just ask them what time works for them. Usually it's something along the lines of this. Okay, good to know that you're interested. I have time available between 6 to 8 p.m. on Thursday or 10 to noon on Saturday morning. Which 30-minute time block would you like to book? A, this sets professionalism because you're setting a time standard. B, they're working around your schedule because you value your time. Chances are you're busy too. And 3, if they're unable to accommodate those times, usually that means they're not super interested, because if they were interested, they would move the rest of their schedule around to make time for that. Now, obviously, sometimes this may not work because they have shift work or other things like that, and you can accommodate those scenarios. But for a majority of the people, you want them to book a time. And something that I've actually done recently is And this comes from being a realtor, but if people are interested in viewing the property and I don't want to waste my time not knowing if they're going to show up, because I have found that about 50% of people don't show up to showings, is that you can actually do an open house and say, yeah, no problem, from 11 till noon on Saturday, you can come check it out whenever you want. There will be other people walking around. As they show up, you get their name, make sure they showed up, you have a little talk with them, you show them around the place. And then this way, it actually drives up demand so that people say, oh, other people are interested in this, let's fill out an application. And B, you don't have to waste your time waiting for specific people to show up. And that leads me to the third point. After you've pre-screened your pre-screening people and they've come to the viewing, now you want them to fill out an application. And this is a balance because you don't want your application to be too cumbersome, because then a lot of people won't fill it out. Renters can sometimes be lazy. And so because of that, you want it to have enough questions that you filter out the very lazy people, but not so much questions that you filter out the sort of skeptical people who don't want to give you too much information. Physical forms are pretty outdated, and a lot of people don't have scanners or ability to send you stuff, and so they're just going to send you pictures. And so instead, we've reverted to online applications. We give them a QR code or a link to it that they can fill out, and then it populates an Excel spreadsheet so we can view all of the data nicely. The fourth step, once you have all this information from the application, is you need to verify the information in the application. You run background checks, credit checks if you want to. Those do cost money. You calculate their debt to income ratio, and you call their references. And so we're gonna touch on all of those, but let's start with the debt to income ratio. Typically, I don't want my tenants to be in a position where if they get laid off or their work misses a check for whatever reason, they aren't able to pay the rent. And so we recommend no more than 33% of their gross income should be the rent amount. So if they're making $3,000 a month, the rent shouldn't be more than $1,000. And this is not to say that you should set the rent based on their income, but if they're making $2,000 and they're applying for a $1,500 per month apartment, they will not qualify for that because they do not make enough money to afford that. And it's up to you to set that standard, because often people won't set that standard for themselves. And they might think, oh, I have an extra $500 left over, but then they have all these other fees that they have to pay. And guess what? They're missing rent. So it's actually irresponsible of you to rent to those people who can't afford your place for that amount. Now, that touches on a whole nother level of unaffordability that we're not going to cover in this video, but for time's sake, if they can't afford it based on that 33%, and yeah, maybe you can be flexible if they're getting another job or if they have a legitimate reason, that's up to your own judgment. When you do the background checks, actually make sure you're talking to the people who they say they are. If it's a coworker, if they're saying it's a coworker or a mentor or whatever, you need to verify that person's information, because a lot of times people just give their best friend and they say, hey, pretend to be this person, right? And so the way you'll be able to tell if they are lying is by sort of throwing them off with unexpected questions. And the last part, once you have gone through all of these scenarios, you will get to the process where hopefully you have a few people that were approved for the application. You will do a final call to verify, and then you will eventually receive the deposits and then sign the lease. And then we transition into the signing lease portion, which we'll cover in the next video of managing your rental properties. So stay tuned for that one. I'll see you in the next video.